Zero trust data resilience is some work that we did, myself and the folks at Object First and the folks at Veeam. We really teamed up and looked at, number one, this big trend in the information security industry called zero trust. Probably most of you in your enterprises have some sort of zero trust initiative that's being driven from the security side. And zero trust really represents the best combination of best practices, technologies, and architectures for applying much more effective and much more dynamic access policies to everything that we do. And of course, everything is now connected and needs to be secured. And what we did as we teamed up was to say, you know what? Data backup and recovery really needs to be part of an enterprise's zero trust strategy and architecture, but there's not a lot of written art or conversation about this, kind of a blank space in the industry. So we created this concept called zero trust data resilience, where we took the CISA, United States' cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, that zero trust maturity model, and we extended it to cover data resilience, to apply data backup and recovery to this. And we're pretty excited. We got a pretty good feedback on this concept. There's lots of zero trust maturity models out there. There's the one that we're seeing on the picture here is from United States CISA organization. The US DoD has one, and there's we're probably nearly into triple digits if you count consulting companies and software companies, et cetera. But this one really from CISA has more or less become the de facto standard. And what it does is it nicely organizes really, I would say, most of IT across these 5 pillars of identity, data, networks, applications and workloads, and data. And then these 3 cross-cutting capabilities that we see at the bottom there: visibility and analytics, automation and orchestration, and governance. And within those, what CISA has done is broken them down to about 40 to 50 functions. And they give you a way of analyzing or scoring your organization's maturity across each of those functions to help you understand, okay, I'm at a level 1 over here, I'm at a level 2 over here. And most importantly is it gives you attributes to shoot for as you move up these pillars. Oh, I'm using no MFA, I'm moving up to using standard MFA, I'm using phishing resistant MFA, and I'm using dynamic MFA, as one example of a progression through the identity pillar. So it's a really nice way of framing this up. Zero trust is built on 3 really simple principles, and you'll see in a second how we extend that to the data backup and recovery area, or ZTDR. And zero trust is really a security strategy that says, okay, wait a minute, let's do this thought experiment and assume that our organization is compromised in some fashion. There's a malicious actor on some device, on the network, et cetera. Given that, we need to segment the access as much as possible so that we've minimized the attack surface, the ability for the actor to take advantage of something, and reduce the blast radius of an attack. The second principle is this notion of explicit verification. We need to move to a default deny model. No access to anything, no ability to send network packets or make a connection unless your access is explicitly validated. You've been authenticated, and then you have a policy that's evaluated that says, yes, we know who this is, we know what device they're on, and we're going to grant them access. And even when access is granted, we need to enforce the principle of least privilege, which is the minimum possible access for any identity to do what they need to do to be productive, but really nothing more, to make ourselves resilient to all of the malicious actors that are out there. So what we did is we looked at these zero trust principles and we applied them to the area of data backup and recovery. In particular, looking at what are the requirements for world-class data backup and recovery systems that obviously Veeam and Object First together have put in place. And the first is to segment or separate your backup software from your backup storage. Clearly, if any one of those is compromised or has an incident and is unavailable, the system needs to have the resilience so that the infection or the disaster can't spread. The second is our classic 3-2-1 or 3-2-1-0-0 backup rule, which is to support multiple resilient zones, to have the right trade-off between low latency and geographic proximity, as well as remote resilience to local disasters. And then, of course, immutability, one of our favorite topics that we can't talk enough about that.
There's some misconceptions out there that zero trust means don't trust your employees, but that's not what you're saying at all, is it? It's assume they've been compromised. Is that right?
That's right. It's not about not trusting people. It's about not trusting packets and components on the network and enforcing the principle of least privilege and only allowing access after they've been verified.
Okay, let's move on to some platform requirements then. You want to talk to environmental checks and balances. How do we get started here?
So we talked about those 3 principles, and as you're looking for a solution that meets those, I mean, clearly you want to have a solution that has all 3 of those, the 3 zero trust data resilience principles. But the other things to look at are, first of all, to make sure that you have the ability in your organization to proactively validate your backup and recovery processes. And that's clearly the most important thing that you can do, is when there's an incident or a disaster, to make sure that you practice these processes so that it's effective. And then the second piece is to adopt a solution that is operationally, functionally rich enough for you to do what you need to do, but simple enough that you or your team can operate it.
ZTDR can be remarkably simple, yet remarkably complex at the same time. When you bring in the simplicity, I still want the scalability. I still want all the fun features, the sophistication, if I want to use them. If I don't want to use them, that's okay, they can sit on the sidelines. But what I do need to know is that my data is safe, that when I need to activate my BCP or DR plan, it's not going to take a rocket scientist, thankfully, to go down that road. So hugely important to keep your data safe, but it's also hugely important to be able to use that data when you need to get there. What's the point of having all your backups, all your replications, all your everything, if you can't use it? And what's the point of having all that and it's safe if you don't have the right people to use it in those situations?
When evaluating specifically for solutions that you're looking to use, you got to be careful, right? Like, everyone promises everything these days, and I think that's actually a bad thing. The more you have, the more risk there is. It's just more paths of entry and more ways that you can get in and do damage, right? So it's all about finding the right design, as well as pairing it with the right products and practices, and building up that knowledge of who has access to what.
One of the first questions I get a lot of times when I'm talking to an enterprise about zero trust, which is, okay, this sounds great, I'll get this technology, and then I've got zero trust, right? I mean, well, no, you need to know who should have access to what. And what that means is, you've got to understand your identities, you've got to have some reasonably good and hopefully improving identity lifecycle processes for onboarding and offboarding users and understanding roles. And you need to know what's on your network and what they need to get access to. If you don't have that, then all the technology in the world isn't going to help you. If you do have that, and this is an incremental journey, we all understand that, that's how you get to this notion of zero trust and applying it across your organization. Ask yourself, literally today, right? Sit there and take 5 minutes and ask yourself some questions. In our organization, in my organization, do we have any of these concepts in place around segmentation, around multiple resilience zones? How do we have our backups being immutable? And then tomorrow, or maybe next week, right? Get your mind around ZTDR being an iterative approach that you can put in place a plan for, over the next few weeks and few months. Engage with your security team, proactively validate your recovery processes, and then evolve over the long term to look at how can and should we evolve our infrastructure. Do we need to deploy additional software or technology, either on the backup side or on the security side, to get to this?